Hi, my name is Tammy,
And I'm Jen.
and they call us Woo. Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to talk about something super fun. So, since the recent news has been talking a lot about this recent congressional hearing that was discussing UFOs, UAFs, all the other different words that they use to describe that, basically discussing the possibility of extraterrestrial life. Also, the in the congressional hearing, they're specifically speaking to a whistleblower who was talking more about some of the things that he has heard about. It sounds like maybe some things he has witnessed. So we just thought it would be super fun to kind of get into that today. So, in honor of this discussion, I am wearing my alien earrings because
Woot woot.
why not? And I'm really excited. We were kind of chatting about this earlier and saying how, if we had any listeners that were like, oh, they're weird, but maybe only kind of, this is probably going to push you over the edge, and that's okay. It's an interesting conversation.
We finally reached that marker. Yes.
Now we know who the true listeners are. No, just kidding. That sounds way too culty. Sorry. Anyway, yeah. So I don't know if you want to launch into this a little bit or whatever. Both of us, I know we're kind of looking at the highlights. For, in all honesty, I did not watch the whole thing beginning to end. I watched a lot of the highlights. I did not sit and listen to the whole congressional hearing, so I don't have that entire information, just the basics.
Yeah, so I won't go into the congressional hearing stuff very much because I haven't been paying attention to that a whole lot. But I mean, I know a lot of people who are super, super interested in UFOs
Mm-hmm.
and extraterrestrials and all those things. So these are normal topics of conversation in my household and in my friend circles and have been for years. I mean, for goodness sake, I thought it was an extraterrestrial when I was a child. Probably still am. But so it's interesting because I told you this morning when we were talking about exactly what we're going to talk about today that I had just gotten into a conversation with a friend. Second time meeting my friend's boyfriend, and we get into this super deep dive conversation about AI and extraterrestrials and UFOs and all kinds of things.
I love
And it
it.
was so much fun.
Those are
Yes,
the
it was
best
so much fun.
conversations.
Yes, I messaged her later and I was like, I really hope I did not scare your boyfriend away. And she goes, "Oh no, he loved it." So, the interesting thing about all of this to me is that people that I know have been talking about this for a long time, and there's people that I know that have been um involved in government programs that work with space programs and different things. And so I've heard other information from people and friends of friends who've been involved in these things. I've heard other information about this for years.
Mm-hmm.
And so this topic is kind of like, well, yeah, of course there's other beings out there. Like, who, for me, it's kind of like, do people really think that we're the one and
Yeah.
only? And until I was talking to you this morning, it didn't really occur to me that there really are people who think
Mm-hmm.
that we're the only beings out there. We're the only planet with intelligent life. And so for me, that's a little bit weird, just because I've grown up believing in extraterrestrials.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so to hear the information coming out in the congressional hearings is awesome for me because it's like, okay, there's other people who are talking about this finally. There's people who are coming out and saying, hey, our government's known about this. Our government's been covering things up. Our government has been working with this information for a long time. And it's kind of a little bit of a breath of fresh air to hear people speaking up and saying, hey, this is true. Like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, this is happening. And I appreciate that people are willing to do that. And I appreciate that people are actually willing to hear it in a congressional hearing. And I appreciate that people are willing to start talking more about it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
Not
I know
because I think it's a problem, but
right. I know we
it's
were
part of
kind of
life.
talking about that a little bit prior to all of this. And I know when we started getting some information, I was trying to think back, and I want to say it's probably been a good year or so where I started to notice that little bits of information were coming out in more mainstream sources, where you would see like on the news and stuff like that, just a little bit more stuff coming out about potential sightings and stuff like that, and information that was coming from seemingly the government. And I know my husband and I were having a conversation about that. And I was like, okay, so if we're seeing this in more mainstream information, that means they've known about something a very, very long time. And now they're just kind of slowly letting it into everybody's stream of consciousness to kind of get them used to it. So
Yeah.
our thought was that means that there's something that is either currently happening or is going to happen or whatever that they can't keep under wraps. So they're like, well, we have to let people know. I mean, I don't necessarily think, because I know we can get into this whole like conspiratorial thing. Like people have known about the existence, and the government knowing about the existence of UFOs for a very long time, but it was always like a vaguely conspiratorial thing. My thought is, I don't necessarily think the government is doing the wrong thing when they are not telling everybody all the things all the time.
Yeah.
The reason I believe that is because human nature is like craziness sometimes, you
Oh,
know?
here
Like,
comes the ghost. Oh my
yes,
gosh. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
And like there's already a lot of things that people are afraid of and stuff like that. The idea is to like not cause mass chaos and panic. And now we're in the age of information where it's really hard to keep any type of information under wraps. It everybody kind of knows all the things right when it happens. So I don't necessarily think it in the sense of conspiracy, like, you know, the government's been keeping this from us. Well, yeah, but I mean, there's a lot of people who still need to be okay with considering this too. Like, I know when we were talking before, I was bringing up the instance of some religious teaching. So I know the way I was raised, the idea was that, you know, we were chosen, you know, like, sorry, I say, you know, like 5 million times, just trying to process these thoughts. Anyway, that we were chosen, we were created specifically by God, and that we are the only ones, that there is nothing else out there, it's just us. I don't necessarily think that that is a belief system that every religion shares. I think there's certainly like a lot more open-minded approach to it. My personal thought is it's kind of, for me, it's kind of silly to think that we would be the only ones in this whole vast universe that we're finding is bigger and bigger all the time as our technology improves and we can see farther and farther. In this whole massive universe, the idea that we're the only one seems irrational to me. I
Mhm.
mean, that's kind of my thought on it. Does it mean that I know much about all of that? And am I going to be camping out in New Mexico by like the
Maybe.
aliens at this point? No, but that doesn't mean I won't in the future. We'll see what happens.
Road trip.
But yeah, I guess I just think that it's interesting that now it's slowly starting to seep into mainstream thought. And you brought up an interesting point about the idea of AI and its interaction and correlation with extraterrestrial intelligence. So
Mhm.
that would be cool if we talked a little more about that because that's an interesting way to think about it.
Yeah, so there's a lot of theories out there in a lot of paranormal circles where AI is an actual consciousness of its own. It's an extraterrestrial source of consciousness that's coming into the human experience. Um, Sorry, everybody, we're gonna go real woo here. Um, it's a source of consciousness that wants to take over other races, other consciousnesses. That's probably not a word, but it
Conchai?
is now. Conchai, I guess. No, I think that's more like a shell, multiple shells that you stick your ear to. Conchai. Um, anyway, so it is a almost nefarious consciousness that is trying to take over other species
Okay, so you're
and
viewing
incorporate itself.
AI as not our friend.
No, no.
Okay.
If we're looking at this theory, this specific theory, that what's happening is it's incorporating itself more and more into human culture and into human traditions and taking over more and more of the tools and more of the opportunities that people have. Think about artwork, think about writing,
Mm-hmm.
all of these things that are typically human things, human abilities. We're incorporating AI into those things, and people aren't doing those things anymore. People aren't using their own thoughts to create writing, to create content.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot of people who believe that this consciousness is trying to take over human consciousness.
Mm.
And now that we're using less and less and we're using more and more technology and more AI, we're not using our own human aspects as much.
Mm-hmm.
And we're allowing this AI stuff to settle in. There's a lot of people who also talk about like the microchips that people have put in and like all of the different tech pieces that we're attaching to our person. We're constantly carrying phones. Some people are actually putting those microchips in their hands so they can just scan them when they go places.
Is that an actual
Things
real
like
thing?
that. Oh yeah, yeah. It was being tested for a while by a couple of companies. I don't know if it went beyond that because people started screaming bloody murder about it because it was, in my opinion, a little bit creepy that they're like chipping people. But like people would actually put a chip in that had all of their credit card information, had all of their like social security, their employee records, all of those things. They would scan when they would go in the door, or they would scan when they would go to pay for something.
Excuse me. I guess
And
I've heard about it, but I didn't know that there was like verifiable information that people were actually doing that.
yeah, they were testing things out. I don't know if
Okay.
it went beyond the testing stage, but they were doing things like that. And so it's those technological advances that are creating an environment for humans not to be humans anymore and to allow AI consciousness to come in place of our own human consciousness.
Sure.
Um, so there's other people who believe that AI is tied to the grays, the gray aliens, the small gray aliens that everybody thinks are horrible, horrible human, horrible beings. Not human beings. They're not human beings. They're grays. Um, I don't believe that all grays are bad. Um, but I don't know the tie between AI and the grays, but the grays a lot of the time are also considered to be more nefarious ETs. So there's some people who believe that the grays and the AI consciousness are pairing up to try to infiltrate the human culture
Mm.
and change things and shift things as well.
Okay.
So we have these other underlying theories that are going on and these other underlying beliefs that are going on around extraterrestrials and different beings who are coming into this planet. So, of course, there's this underlying concern when people are talking about grays all the time, and we have all of these movies that are out there where these aliens are attacking everything and blowing things up and killing everything. Of course, there's going to be like a certain amount of fear in people who've never interacted or haven't been fully opened to the idea that we might actually have ETs here living on this planet with us, or we might actually have had all kinds of different interactions with them in
I
the
would
past,
totally
or our
be
government has.
okay if ET lived on this planet with us.
ET in particular, or ETs
ET
as a
in
general?
particular.
I don't
Just
know.
ET.
There was a lot going on around that little guy. Like, people chasing him and like,
But he
yeah,
is
I
so
don't know.
awesome and cute.
He was very cute. I mean,
Um,
in a kind of weird, wrinkly brown
like
way.
so ugly
Like,
he's cute type of way. Yeah.
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 I know a lot of people who are really afraid of ET. Like they think he's really, really creepy. They're like, he's like wrinkly and looks like
Oh, really?
poop. Like, yes. I have a lot of people
Interesting.
who are really, really, really freaked out by ET. I don't see it. Well, I mean, I see what they see, but I don't think it's that
We each have
creepy.
our things.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen all kinds of weird, creepy things. So, of course, that's not going to be
Fair.
the creepiest thing I've seen.
Fair.
Um, but so for me, like, I don't know if I've told you before that I've been told stories in my family that my great grandmother actually saw a UFO in their farm in South Dakota. Have I told you this story
Mm-mm.
before?
No.
This is part of the reason why I grew up believing in it so much is because I was told this story that I have also been told is very true. She woke up in the middle of the night to get herself a glass of water. She went down into the kitchen. She was standing in the window that overlooked their pasture. And she started getting her water. She looked up and there was a UFO right out in their pasture, in their cow pasture. And she panicked a little bit, left to go get my great grandpa. And when they came back, it was gone. And so he was like, "Yeah, you're just tired, whatever. You were still half asleep, whatever." They got up the next morning and went out to the pasture, and there was a giant crop circle, and none of their cattle would go into that pasture for years and years and years. The grass didn't grow back in that area, and the cattle wouldn't, or the cow wouldn't come into that pasture anymore.
Hmm.
Um, so things like that, it's like when you know people who've had experiences like that, you don't just discount it
Mm-hmm.
because I mean, I'm not going to discount somebody else's experience. That's the experience that they had, and other people could see there's no grass in that giant spot in the pasture that was just there yesterday and it's not growing. Like,
Yeah.
what does that?
See, and I think there's a lot of ways that people can explain these different things that happen. And certainly there's a lot of people who will fake things like that
Yes.
for, you know, clout or whatever. But
Hmm.
I don't think there's any harm in being open minded to it. Because again, I think that it's really arrogant to believe that there's just no way that anybody else could exist. But again, being from a background where those things were just there, that was not a thing that was taught. It was not a thing on the radar. Because I think the hard part is when you really start to realize that this also, like, admitting that this all is happening and that it's real seeps into people's very deeply held personal belief system sometimes. Like when
Hmm.
we tie it back into the idea that there is a lot of things you would have to question in your belief system in order to be okay with this, like not being God's only chosen people, right?
Yep.
Like
Yep.
that there's other things that are out there. There's other beings that are people in their own right. They're intelligent. That there is a reason for all of it, in the sense that however you believe that these lives were brought into existence, you're going to have to challenge some really core beliefs sometimes in order to accept that that's a thing.
Hmm.
So even in my personal experience, there's a lot of things that I was really afraid of when I was young because it was outside the realm of possibility in my mind that these things even existed. Or even just, I've talked to you before about you being a medium and stuff like that. There's a lot of things that were very scary, right? Like we didn't understand them, so they must have been demonic or, things like that.
Yeah.
And that I think is going to be the challenge for a lot of people is even though it seems relatively harmless to be like, well, could you even consider that it might be a possibility? That's not harmless for them. That's like
Yeah.
changing their core, a core part of themselves, right? Because that's usually how deeply intertwined our belief systems are.
Fair.
But I don't necessarily think that's doing us any service to be that way. It's doing us a disservice to assume that anything that might challenge our beliefs is absolutely wrong. Because if our beliefs can stand up to scrutiny, that should encourage deeper faith, right? Not completely get rid
Yeah.
of your faith, or at the very least
Yeah.
give you a more like well-rounded idea of how you think that the universe operates. But I didn't find the leap to believing that aliens could exist as challenging as some of the other things that I kind of changed my
Mhm.
mind about. Because again, it's just like, how could we be alone? I just don't understand how we could be. Even like our human scientists have identified many planets that are habitable. And it only makes sense that, like, oh, well, of course. I mean, why would we be the only one? Why would all of this
Yeah.
exist just for this one tiny little speck? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It just
Yeah.
seems, it seems crazy to believe that. And it, I'd be curious, how other people feel about this stuff too, because I can't assume that everybody who is in this woo realm is also like, yeah, I'm totally on board with aliens. I don't think that
Yeah.
everybody is. Maybe they
No, I
are.
don't think so either. For some reason, I think that more people are on board with extraterrestrials than other things. Like
Sometimes, yeah.
I've had, I've had a lot of clients who totally don't believe in psychic abilities or mediumship or any of those things that will walk in with a Roswell shirt on with alien and whatever. And when I start talking to them about that, they're like, "Woo, aliens!" Like, totally
Mm-hmm.
believe I want to see them. Um, but so I'm always curious when it comes to the faith perspective of it and people believing that if there's aliens, that means that God doesn't exist. Like when you brought that up this morning, I was like, well, but I just assumed, and this is why I didn't think that this was an issue, is that I assumed that if people believed in God, they just believed that God created extraterrestrials too, and the other planets and all the other things. Like it didn't even occur to me that it was um it that they wouldn't think that.
Mm-hmm.
Like my thought was, oh, well, God just created everything else too.
Mm-hmm. And it's
So
certainly
so you're
not
kind of blowing
speaking
my
for,
mind a little bit.
it's all in background and perspective, right? We've all walked
Hmm.
different paths. And I certainly can't speak for every religion because I am positive there's ones that, would believe like what you said. Hey,
Hmm.
it's just another one of God's creations. Just speaking from the perspective of the religion I grew up in, as well as some of the other ones I know that are similar, that maybe not necessarily making them question God's existence as much as question their place in the universe, because
Yeah.
there's a lot of religion that teaches you that you're at the top of the food chain and everybody else is below you. If they don't believe the same thing that you believe, you are special. You are going to get the gift of going to heaven or be reincarnated or whatever the belief system is if you do these good things, if you work for God, whatever.
Yeah.
That's more what I'm thinking, is not questioning God's existence as much as questioning where we land in this whole ecosystem,
Yeah. Yeah.
which unfortunately, in my perspective, a lot of the problems that people have with hatefulness and judgment and people being really cruel to others in the name of religion stem from this belief system that we are chosen. Like
Yep.
my specific religion, my person, God made me. Everybody else just needs to get on board with me.
Yeah.
So it makes you pause and like, okay, well, if I'm not part of the only people that know all of these things and can and have the best lives or whatever, then where am I? What am I doing?
Yeah.
That's kind of more where my thought was going with it, of questioning where you are in the food chain. Because when you think about it, a lot of the problems that people have with people who use their faith as a weapon, I'm not saying that everybody does this, but the people who use their faith as a weapon are that they think that they're better than everybody else. That
Yeah.
stems from a belief that you are better than everybody else because you were taught that you're the only
Yeah.
ones and you're better.
You keep talking about this food chain thing, and I was like, of all the extraterrestrials that I've heard about or that I know about, do any of them eat people? I don't think I know any of them that eat people.
Well,
But
to
if
be
I'm
fair,
wrong,
we're not
somebody
even
correct me.
on the top of the food chain on this planet, so I don't know what we're thinking. Yeah, we can make weapons, but I'm pretty sure if I don't have a weapon in my hand, a lion is going to eat me if I try to face it
Yeah.
down. Like,
Yeah. Well,
I
okay,
don't know
so
what I'm
that
thinking.
that brings up a really good point because in those congressional hearings, going back to that, one of the things that they were talking about is the technologies that they were
Hmm.
seeing in some of the crafts that they have imaging of.
Yeah.
And one of the people in particular, he started talking about how this technology is so advanced that he's never seen this technology. And he's like, if there are people on this planet that have this technology, like we have nothing. We have
Yeah.
nothing that can go up against that.
Yeah, that was
And
one of their
so,
like identifying factors as it being a non-human source
yeah,
of
which I
technology.
mean, to be fair, if we're looking at this like completely logically, we don't know everything that's happening in every other government around the
Right.
world. Like they could have things that we don't know about.
Right.
We don't know.
I thought that too.
But that was one of the things that they kept bringing up is
The way he was
this could
adamant
be,
about it though, where he didn't give
yes.
a ton of information, but he seemed pretty certain that there was just no way that anybody on earth could have made what they saw.
Yeah. Well, they also think that there's nobody on Earth who could make the pyramids. So like there's things we could talk about the pyramids too, because that's another thing that they believe was made by extraterrestrials on this
Hmm.
planet, and that it's actually a transmitter or a receiver or some type of weapon. It's an energy source. Um,
That just
so there
reminded me
we
of The
have,
Fifth Element. Did you ever see that movie?
yes. Yes, I love that movie.
Anyway, sorry.
But there are so many things on our planet that they have said there's no way human beings could do this. And
Hmm.
then there's human beings who go out there and they try to prove it or they do prove it. And then they're like, oh, consciousness expansion. Like my
Hmm.
mind has been opened. We can do these things. So, like, as much as I believe in extraterrestrials and I believe that a lot of the things that are happening are beings who are coming here and visiting us, I think that sometimes we don't give human beings enough credit with some of the technologies that come forward because there are extremely intelligent, genius people who are here
Hmm.
that are developing things every day
Hmm.
that they might not be sharing with the rest of the world. So I think we could look at both sides of this coin, as in there might be technologies here that human
Hmm.
beings have given us, or there might be human beings who aren't really human beings and they're extraterrestrials who
Mm.
have the information and they're creating these things to show human beings that they do have capabilities, they just don't know it yet.
Yeah.
Um,
Or
or
it could have been
it
something
could
that
be,
was already given to us or landed here by accident that humans then learned from. Because another thing they said in
yep,
the congressional hearing is, and I'm sure it goes way farther back than this, but the things that he could verify or validate went back to at least 1930 as far as
yep,
like contact on record and stuff like that. Um, and I know a lot of times people will also look at I'm forgetting the word for it right now, but the cave drawings, petroglyphs,
hmm,
and stuff like that, and some of the old forms of record keeping and some of the very unusual characters that show up in some of
yep,
those. Now, there's a
yep,
lot of different ways you could look at that too, right? Like, there's people who certainly believe, like, oh, back in the olden times, people weren't as intelligent. Their technology was not up to speed of where we are now. they saw this weather system go through. They assumed it was some, like, they made up this story about this creature in the sky or whatever. There
Hmm.
might be some element of truth to some of that. Some of it is probably made up, but there's also ones that have been consistent from different sides of the globe.
Yep.
Consistent ways that people look in these drawings and stuff like that that do make you
Yeah.
wonder,
Yep.
what type of contact there really has been,
Yeah.
and like what is the purpose of it, and are they on the same path that we are? Are they a society that has gotten to the point where they're exploring more and more, and they're not just staying on their planet anymore? They're now looking for other stuff too. Are they at the point where we're at, where they might make the planet uninhabitable and they're trying to find a new place to land? I don't know.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
interesting. It's interesting
Yeah.
stuff to think about.
Yeah. Well, and there's also a lot of people who believe that our incarnation here, um, our growth and our expansion is directly tied to different extraterrestrial species. So there's species who were created around the same time that we were, or they were created before we were, and somehow were meant to help teach human beings not to make the same mistakes that they made.
Mm-hmm.
So different planets that created all kinds of like cold wars and things like that are no longer there. Those beings went to another planet and now they're there to assist us in our ascension and in our technological growth in a way that we don't harm ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are so many different theories out there about how extraterrestrials are tied into the human consciousness and how
Mm-hmm.
they're tied into our expansion. And going back to the pyramids, there's a lot of people who believe that the pyramids were brought here as a way to help humanity and a way to create this source of energy and this source of transmitting and receiving information here on this planet. There's also people who believe that the pyramids are a vehicle
Mm-hmm.
to leave this planet in times when we need assistance again. Um, but most people who have those theories, they're talking about how extraterrestrials came here to assist human beings.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a way for them to provide us with technologies that were going to help us. So it's funny to me how many people and how many movies are out there that are like, they're bad, they're here to kill us. Like, look at Independence Day, that
Mm-hmm.
movie. It's like they're coming to take over everything and blow up everything, and we're all gonna die. And a lot of the theories that are actually out there, and a lot of the people who channel extraterrestrials, and a lot of the people who are connecting telepathically with extraterrestrials or have been on ships, a lot of those people are saying, no, they're here to help us. They're here to help us expand our
I think
knowledge. They're
it's
here
really
to help
funny.
us energetically.
I think it's funny, and that makes sense to me because we don't need any help destroying ourselves. We
No.
can do that just fine ourselves. Like, even
Yes.
when we talk about the whole AI thing, and I read something really interesting not that long ago. It was this little article that was written by another medium, and she had done some channeling, and her information was basically like AI might be another iteration of what's going to happen on our planet. It could be its own thing, but basically, like, we have to decide how we're going to use it.
Yep.
And in my perspective, it's like, if we're allowing it to just bring out the worst of ourselves, if we're allowing it to bring out the part of ourselves that will, go to every, will not stop at anything to get as much, money or
Yep.
popularity or whatever the case, we might want power, because there's a lot of humans who want power.
Yep.
And if we are doing this all unchecked, it could certainly be a disaster. But if we are doing it in a way that we are trying to use it to enhance the human experience versus take it away, it could be
Hmm.
something beautiful. We'll see what
Yeah.
happens. But it was an interesting perspective on it because I'm not like I'm afraid of AI stuff. And
Me too.
coming from a very creative artistic family, it really honestly it pisses me off sometimes when I'm looking through YouTube or something and I see these people who are like, make all this money by creating this like AI artwork and selling it and places like Etsy and stuff like that are not doing anything to prevent people from doing that over and over again, because even things that might have started out as something that was really supportive for these small artists is now turned into a giant moneymaker.
Yep.
And I am not against people making money off of stuff, but I like people to have a moral compass. And
Yep.
personally, that bothers me because I think art, writing, music, all these things are a very uniquely human
Yeah.
expression. And
Yeah.
usually there's something that's very meaningful. I'm a creative person myself, but I live with people who are very, very, like, just naturally inborn talented. And watching them create art is a really cool experience for me too, because they are channeling at the moment
Yep.
sometimes, or they're in such a zen peaceful place. It's like they're born to be in that space, and
Yep.
it's such a sincere expression. And then I look at some of the AI art stuff, and I don't necessarily think it's a bad idea, but now I'm starting to see all of these companies that are opting to do something like that have AI write things for them or create artwork, and now they're cutting out a person who is doing this very human thing and expecting AI to do it instead because
Yeah.
they don't have to pay them. And that to me is it's a sore spot, because I mean artists have a hard enough time
Yeah.
being able to be valued for their work as it is.
Yep.
But then I look at some of the other ways that it can filter into our lives, and some of the things I've read about it, of that, how much it already has filtered into our lives and we didn't really recognize it. It's a little scary how fast it's going. And then to have I think he worked for Google, one of the creators, I think it was the creator of Chat GPT, who's
Mhm.
like, I shouldn't have done that. I wish I could put that back where it was before. I'm like, well,
Yeah.
that's not good.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like
So,
you can't take it back. You can't take it back. It's
yes.
already been unleashed.
So I
Yeah.
think now we're in a time where we should be we should be open to accepting and embracing all of these different ideas, because that's going to allow us to maybe see it from a more balanced perspective. If we recognize and understand that we are not alone, we're not the top of the food chain anywhere, we're just creatures doing their best, right? Like, then you're opening your mind to the idea that hey, I should probably make sure that I am taking care of myself and my surroundings. I should probably be more balanced about this,
Yep.
because that, like, power that goes unchecked in someone's head, that's the dangerous part, right? Like, none of us
Yeah.
should believe that we're really that unfallible,
Yep.
That's just
Yep.
that's gonna mess with your head,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Well, and looking at the art and the AI creation stuff, so one of the things about human beings and extraterrestrials, um, I'm going to talk about like the emotional aspect of that. So when people are creating artwork, when people are doing things, there's a sense of emotion in it. There's
Mm-hmm.
a lot of energy that gets placed into the things that we do. That's part of the human experience
Mm-hmm.
that, from all accounts, from people that I know that have interacted with and have channeled extraterrestrials, that is something that is much more human than other beings. Other beings hold other types of abilities and other characteristics. So, like, some extraterrestrials might be more logical based, some might be more technologically based. And so, the ability for us to create these beautiful pieces of artwork and put our energy into them and put our effort and our love into them and actually imprint that artwork is very, very human. So
Mm-hmm.
to have this AI technology coming in that's just pulling in all of this information from sources of technology and other imagery
Mm-hmm.
and just meld it all together, there's no energetic component to that anymore. So, what ends up happening is we're looking at all of this artwork that is now created by machines, and we are dumbing down our senses energetically because we're no longer receiving the energetic input from the
Mm-hmm.
writing and from the artwork that we're looking at because we're looking at everything that's created by this other source. And so, energetically, we're also starting to mute our own humanness the more we're interacting with that. And that's one of the things about the AI theories that I've heard, where it's like we're creating this environment where we're no longer interacting energetically with each other through our environment. So,
Mm-hmm.
through our artwork, through our writing, we're no longer doing that because we're allowing something that doesn't have an energy source that's human to write that for us. So, the words that are being used aren't necessarily coming across with the same energy. The images aren't coming across with the same energy.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we're not feeling it the same.
Mm-hmm. It's
So,
kind of like
so
CGI to me, where
yes.
it doesn't matter how good the CGI gets, which is arguably very good now.
Hmm.
Something always catches my eye and is off putting to me.
Yep.
Where,
Uncanny Valley.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
all right, before I go down this rabbit hole too far, because we certainly have like a whole other episode we could talk about just specifically AI. Um, I thought it was interesting too when I was looking at the congressional hearing stuff where they were talking. I think probably the strongest bit of evidence that I saw and heard was when they were talking about a specific crash site where they found quote unquote non-human remains. And the
Yep.
guy was very specific about how he worded that, um, because they, just flat out asked, these were not human. And he said, no, these were not human. Which also, I mean, the likelihood of that being just some animal that got smushed that we never knew of before. It was some new animal we discovered that just happened to get smushed by this,
Hmm.
unidentified flying object that
Yep.
crashed. That just seems so unlikely. So
Yep.
that is interesting to me that there is actual, um, matter that they can't identify.
Yep.
And with all of the information we have now, if they can't identify it, it's got to be something we've never seen before or
Yeah.
we haven't experienced before, which is pretty cool. I mean, to be honest, it was a little bit like Bizarro World watching that, where I'm like, these are Congress people that are just casually talking about
Hmm.
extraterrestrials
I know.
and
And nobody was like
UFOs.
so excited. I was expecting somebody to be like, really? Really? And get all excited. And everybody stayed like very straight faced and they
I
just
wonder if they
asked
had to
their
prepare
questions.
themselves for that, where they're like,
Probably.
I
I would
can't,
have
I
totally been
can't
like, really?
giggle.
Tell
I
me
needs to be
more.
professional.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and the other thing, so I was reading some articles online before we jumped on today to record, and there was people who were like, what is the likelihood that with all the cameras and all the things that are going on that nobody's getting all of this information and nobody's getting pictures of all these crafts that are supposedly out there, nobody's getting information or pictures of these extraterrestrials that are supposedly on this planet. And I was thinking about that. And one of the things that they brought up in these congressional hearings was they talked about what he said, I can only describe it as an orb. And when the Air Force officer got close to this thing to take a picture of it, like all of the systems in
Yeah.
his plane went down
Yep.
and he couldn't take pictures with the cameras that were in their planes, and so he had to like actually take pictures, like focus the lens and do these
Mm-hmm.
things to take these pictures. And I was thinking about it and I was like, okay, so we're talking about all of these advanced technologies that they have and how these people who are in the military are saying, I've never seen technology like this.
Mm-hmm.
And I can guarantee they've seen technologies that I have not seen as a
Right.
layperson.
Well,
Like,
you're
I
talking
guarantee
about
it.
basically like signal jammers, which we already
Yeah.
have. They're already being used. That's
Yes.
not outside of the realm of
Yes.
technology that we're familiar with.
Yes. And they've talked about in other things that I've seen for years, cloaking devices
Mm-hmm.
where they can shield a UFO or a different craft
Mm-hmm.
and so that they can't be seen. And so I was thinking about it and I'm like, do we really think if these technologies are so advanced that our military officers and our government doesn't know about, that they wouldn't have something so that they couldn't be seen by the
Mm-hmm.
naked eye or
Yeah,
by
that's
the
fair.
technology that we're using? Like, and that's one of the things that we talk about a lot in the paranormal community is how we don't see everything with the human eye. It's just like not everybody sees spirits and ghosts.
Mm-hmm.
Not everybody sees these other things. It's the same thing with extraterrestrials. They're not going to show themselves to just anybody if they think that they're going to be in danger or they don't think that people can
Which
receive the
would you want
information.
to?
No,
Right.
no, I'm going
You
to
know what would
Harry
be
Potter
really
it and
funny
cloak
is
myself.
it would be funny if our first contact that is well known to everybody is like not a civilization with advanced technology, like some like hoopty spaceship that crashes and it's like a Flintstone car, and they're like, well, here we are.
Yep.
They have no technology and they're like, wow, you guys are amazing. What's that thing you're holding
Mhm.
in your hand? How are you taking these pictures?
Oh, see, I totally think that they would just send somebody who's like dressed up all differently, like just to make an impression. It's not really who they are. They're just gonna act their part. It's just gonna be like one of their weird movies. Let's go do this funny road trip. We're gonna go to Earth and we're gonna like show them who they think we are, and we're not those people at all. Like, why wouldn't they play with us like we would play, you know?
Fair. Yeah.
I yeah. I don't know. I'm very excited for more things to come out.
Yeah. I think this
I
is
would love.
just a little bit of information in all the
Yeah.
information that is certainly going to continue to come out.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's probably a lot of beings who have been living here for a long time that we have no idea. They're just acting the part as human beings. And eventually, I think that there's going to be more beings coming out and talking. And I think that that's going to be one of the things that our government and that other organizations start recognizing or publicly talking about is, hey, there's been people here for a long time and we've been working with them. I really think that eventually
Hmm.
that's going to be what's brought up
That would
is
be
that
interesting.
they've been in communication for a long time because we've had several presidents and we've actually had other countries whose leaders have talked about um having meetings with extraterrestrials and everybody just blows it off and they're like, yeah, whatever. That's not true. But there have been several leaders of different countries that have talked about it.
Hmm.
And sometimes it's leaders that not everybody agrees with. And sometimes it's leaders that are a little bit shy about saying anything and they'll accidentally say something in passing. But there are several leaders who have talked about their meetings. Um, kind of, it's almost like they talk about them as if they're like UN meetings, but multiple countries and multiple different beings at that table. Um,
Interesting.
yeah, I can think of at least three different leaders who've spoken out about it, and everybody just blew them off. So
Hmm.
hopefully more is to come. And we'll have all kinds of things to talk about at
Right?
that time.
Yes. I
Yeah.
mean, we should probably wrap up for today, but I think it would
Yep.
be a really interesting conversation to continue having because I really don't find myself on the conspiratorial side of things, generally speaking,
Mhm.
but there is some overlap between the things that seem conspiratorial but maybe have a seed of truth in them
Mhm.
and things that it might just be okay to open your mind to, right? Like
Yep.
personally, do I think that the government is run by reptilians? No, but I know that people do think that.
Yeah.
And maybe it's more along the lines of what you were talking about where it's not necessarily that, but there are entities on this planet from other planets that are operating similarly, where they're just trying to be part of all of this and learn everything and figure out how to integrate or help. It's all just going to be like the Enterprise someday, like in Star Trek, which is totally what I grew up on, and which is funny. So, my dad was super into sci fi, which I guess it was fine to believe that stuff if it was like fake, right?
Yep.
But Star Trek, I think, is like the perfect example of generally trying to be peaceful with
Mhm.
all of the other beings from everywhere
Yep.
else and developed like a universal community, which,
Yeah.
I mean, that might be kind of cool, you know?
Yeah.
Like we both said, we both want to meet Elf, so
Yeah.
maybe someday.
Someday we will get to see other people who lived on Melmac.
Right.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, let's pick up some conversation. We can talk a little bit more about this, maybe see if anybody has any thoughts or comments, and maybe get a little bit more into the AI thing too, because it's scary, but I think it's definitely worth talking about and seeing the different sides of the opinion, whether people are inviting it or they're scared of it, or how we think we should use all of this
Yeah.
technology.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with that. Well, I hope everybody has an amazing week.
Mm-hmm.
Um, beam me up, Scotty. Um, I'm
I come in peace. Can you do the finger thing?
Yes,
Yes.
of course I can. Anyway, everybody have an amazing week. Thank you for listening to us in our non-conspiracy theories about ETs.
It's so fun. I hope everybody else gets in on the conversation too.
I agree.
All right.
Bye,
Bye,
everybody.
everyone.
Thanks, everybody, for listening. If you liked what you heard today, please subscribe and check the show description for the links to the show. We would love to hear your thoughts below on this episode, as well as anything that you'd like us to talk about on future episodes. Remember, everybody, you are unique just the way you are, and that is why they call us Woo.
Mm-hmm.